as per usual, I started a thing. I tried to look up some information on said thing, found very little that actually helped me, so then decided to do my own thing. Surprise. This video series is going to be about me running Dungeons of Drakkenheim for my players. Pretty much it will be a recap of everything that has happened in my games, as well as my session prep. And obviously that means it will depend highly on my players. So if my players decide halfway through they're no longer interested in this campaign, unfortunately you guys get no ending. Currently, we also meet bi-weekly, and I predict that stays pretty steady, but in the summertime, people, go on vacation and, have lives outside of D&D. Updates might get weird sometimes, but I do hope to update this after every session, probably bi-weekly as well. This first one will be a little weird, right? Because this is going to give you a lot more setup. I am going to assume that you know a little bit of Dungeons of Drakkenheim, but if you don't, it's going to be revealed to you in a kind of story format anyway. After this first one, I want each of these videos to kind of follow this setup. So it'll be like a session recap, kind of in a story format. Then I'll put in my thoughts and insights, things that I think didn't work, things that did work, me just being critical of myself as per usual. And then session prep stuff will be at the end, the stuff I'm going to try to prepare for the next session. This is very much going to be me reflecting on running my campaign, and therefore there will be spoilers. So if you're in my campaign, you know who you are. Maybe don't watch everything. But I'm hoping that this helps anybody who kind of wants to know how I run an in-person game, or who is running Dungeons of Drakkenheim and want a little assistance but want short form version, because obviously you could watch their Dungeon Dude's whole campaign, but I don't have time for that. So, and I'm sure other people don't necessarily have time for that. Here is my version of that story and what my players did and how I tailored it to my group. In other words, let me mess it all up first and you can learn from my mistakes. I am going to try to share all my resources with you. So if I ever mention anything in a video that I use to help supplement or anything, I will put links down below. Basically, I'm going to lay it all bare and you get the ramblings of a madwoman. So if that's what you were here for, welcome. If not, bye. I'm assuming you have some base knowledge of Drakkenheim. I won't go over everything, but if you don't know any of it, I did do a review video about some of the Drakkenheim Foundry stuff. And so you could totally look into that, and I kind of go over the world a little bit there. But if you don't have time for that, I kind of will be going over relevant information as it comes up in the campaign. So no worries. Let's talk about session 0, shall we? So some history. This group is my family. We just got done with Curse of Strahd a couple weeks before the session 0 at least. So essentially we went from one kind of mist to another kind of mist. Curse of Strahd was run by someone else in the group. I was like, well, I'll run the next campaign, give him a break so that he can play a little bit. And then also because when I got sent to the Drakkenheim stuff, I was like, I would run a campaign in this world. Like, it's pretty cool. This group has 5 players and they are all from my family. So my hubby, my mom, my stepdad, my sister, and my niece. One caveat, the niece is 10, so which will totally offer a whole bunch of other challenges, of course, and we will go into that as we get further along, and I think that could be an interesting take as well, huh? As I mentioned, typically we meet bi-weekly, and also our sessions can be anywhere from 4 hours to 8 hours. I mean, typically they're not straight 8 hours straight. Problem is I have a toddler running around. So we also use this as kind of an excuse to get together just as a family anyway. So then we stop in the middle because we need to eat, or my daughter is, getting into something bad, or she has a poopy emergency. Things can happen. We do pause and BS a lot. So we probably go through about 4 to 6 hours of content, depending on what's happening. And these are in-person games. However, I do have a TV that we lay on the table. It has the Dungeons of Drakkenheim Foundry maps, and I also use it for music. And we also use minis, which I can show off. And our session 0 was also kind of went from session 0 into session 1, which in hindsight, I kind of don't recommend for this one just because of where I'm coming from as a person who hasn't really done a lot of deep dive into the world and lore of Drakkenheim. I think if you watched all of the Dungeon Dude stuff, you probably don't need as much prep or anything as me. And if your players are familiar with Drakkenheim, then they might not need as much time between 0 and 1. But I digress. I did give all of my players the world index that's in the backgrounds, and then just some general ideas on the world. And they were pretty much tasked to have a character in mind, but not created until we got to session 0. That said, my sis and my niece made theirs ahead of time, partially because obviously the little girl is 10 years old. So mom wanted to help her and make sure she made a character and we weren't spending the entire time just helping her. They also really read through all of the information before the session, so I really appreciated that. Like, they were pulling up stuff in the lore that I had sent them, at least to me, made it feel like they put a lot of effort into it, so that's very good. So I didn't really mind that they created characters ahead of time. When we got to the table, I laid out all the personal quests on the TV screen, and then I let them choose their personal quests. And then I gave them a kind of brief reminder of the history in the area, in particular about the meteor crashing into the city, as well as the royalty, the civil war that broke out, the throne being unmanned. And I also had them all create connections with each other. So, with all that said, here are our heroes. So we have Delilah, who follows the old faith. She is Elven, which in this world, full-blooded elves are somewhat rare, having mostly mingled with all the other species in the world, so half-elves are pretty common. She has chosen the personal quest Apocalyptic Visions, meaning she's been seeing visions of the crater in her nightmares, which is forcing her to visit Drakkenheim to see this for herself, and she wants to essentially go to the crater in the worst way possible. And she has connected herself to Noct, the other elf, because she's interested in figuring out more about him, because he's an elf, sure, but he's kind of an intriguing elf. So not only are full-blooded elves kind of rare, but he looks different, because Noct is an Elandrian. Is that how you say that? I hope so. An Elandrian elf who is very eccentric. He is a cleric of the Sacred Flame, though he's not associated with the Order of the Silver Flame, because again, that's just like a subsect of the overall world. And he has chosen the Blighted Landscape personal quest, meaning he's kind of looking for a cure of a way to fix things. And as he visits several locations, he's going to learn, more about what the delirium is doing and different spells to help with the contamination, that kind of thing. Then we have Morgan, who is our barbarian, who is actually using a subclass from the Griffin's Saddlebag, which is like a frost barbarian. It's another resource that I have, and she has a history of, she at one point had joined the army, and so she knows a lot about the Civil War, if that ever really comes up, and is vaguely aware of the Hooded Lanterns, which is one faction in Drakkenheim. However, when she returned home from war, she found herself saddled with an overwhelming amount of debt from, I believe, her father is what we settled on, and it's a debt of like 10,000 gold pieces. So that is her personal quest. In order to get more money, she has partnered with Harmon. Harmon is a rogue, and he has a vague familiarity with, the Queen's Men, just because it is one of the bigger underground crime organizations in the realm. But he is not a part of them. He is on the hunt for monsters, having chosen the Monster Slayer personal quest. So he, of course, looked for someone who is beefy and can help him slay said monsters, and that's why he and Morgan are working together. Lastly, we have Zelda, the 10-year-old player who literally named her character Zelda because she knows that Auntie loves Zelda. That aside, she has been traveling with Delilah, learning magic, and they've been helping each other that way. But she's looking to come to Drakkenheim to, unfortunately, she picked, of course, I kind of figured she would pick this, though, I'll add. She wants to prove her claim to the throne. The problem is she is a tiefling, so in order to make that work, she's essentially an illegitimate child of the former king, hidden away. Unfortunately, though, she's also a sorcerer. And in this world, that means she cannot rightfully claim the throne because magic wielders are not allowed to have positions within the nobility. So that will be complicated, possibly too complicated for a 10-year-old, but we'll see. I just have to lay it out in a specific way for her, I believe. Regardless, she's actually kind of the glue of the party, her idea. She's bringing the 2 elves together with the 2 human characters, Morgan and Harmon, because she was traveling with Delilah, learning extra magics and that kind of thing. But she also recognizes that if she wants to take over the throne, she's gonna need some powerful allies and some powerful protection in her quest. So she's called upon Harmon and Morgan to, aid her. So she's kind of the glue, which again, 10-year-old's idea, okay? Once we established how they were all connected and they created their characters, we kind of went right into our first session, which I will talk about in the next episode. But here's some things I would recommend for session 0 now in hindsight. I think it was information overload because, and we'll get to session 1 and all the different factions and things like that in that session. But I think I should have done a session 0 and then maybe a week later do session 1, just because I think it would have allowed players to, 1, tailor their personal quests a little bit, because again, I had them pick right at session 0 and we went right into session 1. So that didn't really give them much opportunity to tailor their quests. Morgan did. Morgan tailored hers to her father and gave me more background that she wanted to be part of the Civil War. She did try. So that was, it did work to an extent, but I think having a little bit of time so they could hash it out without me or just one-on-one would have been a little by session 2, because at this point I've already done session 2. They are more invested as we move forward, so I don't think it really hurt in the long run, but it was just too much information all in one sitting. I would have tailored the world a little bit more, maybe homebrewed a little bit more, mostly because I'm a little bit concerned about the 5 different factions, and I just don't know that this group will be politically minded. So I don't want to focus on that too much. I want to be I don't want to railroad them either, but I want to figure out what they want to focus on and then kind of narrow that focus in a certain direction, even if it is just narrowing their focus on one personal quest at a time or, that kind of thing. I just think that there's just too many. And we also have like a 10-year-old who's not gonna be able to pick up all the fine nuances, but she also doesn't want to be treated like a little kid either. She doesn't want to be treated special because she's a kid. So I'm kind of trying not to tailor the campaign too much just to her. And I also want her to feel like she's getting the real D&D experience, because I have gotten some people's feedback saying, or multiple people actually, kind of saying, well, maybe you should just run her a dungeon crawl that kind of connects to the city, but then if she gets bored with it, they just finish the dungeon crawl and then go back to it. And that would probably work, but I just don't think that that's the real experience. I think a dungeon crawl is good for some groups, but I want her to be able to see all the different aspects of D&D, even if she's only 10 years old, and decide for herself what she likes best. And honestly, especially after session 2, which we'll get to later, I know that a dungeon crawl would not be enough for her. She is definitely more into that role-playing aspect, and she's actually putting forth a lot of effort for it. So we're gonna just keep tailoring it a little bit, but not to the point where we're changing the core mechanics of D&D, And again, I think the other thing I should have done was homebrew a little bit more, because world building is my jam. And so I wish I could have tweaked it more. When I make my own world up, I give myself more wiggle room. When I start running an adventure book, I start trying to run it by the book, puns intended. And really, they should just be more like guidelines, you know? And so I get hung up on doing it by the book, and then I don't let things just happen more organically, or I don't make up things as much on the fly. By session 2, it was fine. I've gotten a little bit more loosey-goosey and I've made adjustments and I've already started wiggling things around a lot. So it's already feeling like my own. But I wish I had kind of just started with that mentality going in. For the first session, so for the session prep for session 1, I wrote out a lot more than usual because I was nervous. I mean, I'm an anxious person, so that's always going to happen. I was just a bit overwhelmed with making sure I remembered everything. And are we surprised? Not really. So I wrote out stuff about Aaron, their main contact, that asked them for the escort to Amberwood, the city closest to Drakkenheim. All of that was like useless because I really didn't refer to it at all. But I did write out some of the encounter stuff, which was useful. I wrote out the stuff about how the people that would come to their camp would act and gave them more personality, which I think helped me roleplay it better later. And then I did prep 2 maps in case. So I prepped one at an intersection where they get accosted by bandits. And then I also included a barn scene in case they decided to follow up on where those bandits retreated to, which they did not, which is fine. And I added all the combat information into my notebook so I wouldn't have to flip through the book. So that was all the stuff I did to prep for session 1. Let me tell you how that went in the next video.